Say a few words to Paul Sperling. He's also running for Congress from 11th Congressional District, which is Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Sperling. I'm a candidate for Congress to represent Staten Island and South Brooklyn. The reason I'm running is because we have many long-standing problems in our country and in our community. And being a native Staten Islander and a native of our community, I've lived with these problems my entire life. I understand what it takes to solve.
But your entire life is not so long. How old are you?
I'm 25 years old.
Okay. I said my entire life when you're like 17.
Well, 25, good amount of time.
25 years, okay.
Now, constitutionally, the Constitution says you have to be 25 years old and a resident of the state, in which I'm just saying, constitutionally I meet all the requirements, and I'm very well versed in what goes on here in our community. Truly, truly, we need progressive ideas to solve these problems. But in order for us to have progressive ideas, we have to reaffirm what it means to be a progressive in America today. Progressives know that America's diversity of our cultures and our ideas is what makes America great. Progressives know that government does work when it's transparent and accountable to the people it serves. And progressives know that no person is an island. We are all in this together. And we can make a better country, a better community, and a better world by looking out for one another and recognizing our common humanity. That's why when some said that separate is equal, progressives proudly proclaimed that we cannot have two Americas separated by the color of our skin. When some said that only men have the sensibility to vote, progressives proudly proclaimed that all people have the right to elect their government. When some said that only a man and a woman could be a family, progressives proudly proclaimed that a family is between two people who love one another. When some said space exploration was impossible, progressives proclaimed that we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And after the Great Depression, when some were content to leave the American economy in ruins, progressives proudly demanded a fair economy for every person in America. It is in our very nature as progressives to look toward the future with an eye toward improvement. And that's why every major gain in American history has been thanks to the progressive vision. Allow me to continue, please. I will get to the issues right now. When our forefathers signed the Declaration of Independence, they did not do so with an eye toward a glorious past. They did so with an eye toward a glorious future. And I am proud to continue that tradition today of fighting for a better future for our country. In order to have that better future, we must now stand up for freedom. The freedom of every person to work in a fair economy, where they can make enough money to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities, without domination by conglomerates at home or abroad.
Paul, I don't want to interrupt you, but like
sure.
You sounded like professor of history in a college. I wanted to go a little bit down to earth, 11th Congressional District, Staten Island, Southern Brooklyn, you know, like, because, you know, like, a little bit more, I would say, pragmatic.
So here in our community, basically everyone has realized that they are working longer hours for lower wages. They're working harder and harder than ever before. And yet, we are not seeing any increase in our wages. All hard work is making money for someone. It's making money for the owners of our corporations. But no corporation can exist without the hard work of its employees. So every single person deserves a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And whether you work for a private corporation, a public corporation, every single person deserves the dignity of a good check that allows them to live with a good quality of life. Another major issue in our district, as my opponent Mohan talked about, is the cost of health care. Now, we differ a little bit. I believe that the way to bring down health care costs is to follow what many, many other countries do. That is to move to a Medicare for all system where every single person will be covered and everyone could get the best treatment that we have available.
Oh, but we have two parties in America, one Republican Party and one is a Democratic Party.
Of course.
And even if you win the race, Republicans in Congress and President will not disappear the next day.
They will not.
They will still be around. So how are you planning to work with Republicans to make our healthcare cheaper, I would say, and more affordable while they are still around, and opposed to Medicare for all?
Well, yeah. Medicare for all, many Republicans recognize that Medicare for all makes good sense. Donald Trump, when he was running for president, showed that Medicare for all makes good sense. It's just that the corporations who truly own the Republican Party and many people in the Democratic Party have convinced him otherwise. But you can even convince the business people who own this country, because Medicare for all makes good sense for them too. Because if you own a business and you are competing with countries around the world, other countries allow their citizens to have medical care covered through the government. That burden is not placed on the corporation. So that corporation, an overseas corporation, is at an advantage compared to an American corporation. If we provided health care for our citizens, it will benefit our people and it would benefit our corporations.
So you will try to convince corporations that it's beneficial to them to have this system, right?
It's beneficial to corporations, it's beneficial to the people so everyone can get health care coverage, and it's beneficial to the politicians so that we can finally solve this issue and get the people the quality of care that they deserve.
Thank you. Could you say a few words about yourself? Like I know you're 25 now. You start with
sure.
I have a question. Is that water or vodka? You're
That's water. My mouth gets a little dry when I have to come up here and talk. You want some?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just asked you.
Sure. So I was born and raised on Staten Island. I went to Susan Wagner High School, the College of Staten Island, where I studied international law and constitutional law as well. And after that, I started a business doing property management. Truthfully, I've been interested in politics since I was a young boy. My grandfather is a staunch conservative, and he used to pick me up from school basically every day, and he listened to talk radio. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and I'd be 7 years old arguing against what they were saying on the radio. The way they talk about people and the way they treat people has never sat right with me. And with what's going on in our country, we need someone who's going to stand up for our community, who's going to stand up to the corporations, and who's going to make sure our community is treated fairly. And that is why I'm running for Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question. I agree with everything you're saying, so let's see if we can go for 100%. How do you feel about the move of the embassy from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv?
I'm Jewish.
From Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
That's not what I asked you.
I know. Let me finish.
I want to know what you think of the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Please answer the question.
The number one thing when it comes to Israel for me is the safety of Israel. And by moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem does nothing to increase the safety of the Israeli people.
Does it do anything to hurt it?
I would say that what it could do to hurt it is it could inflame tensions in the region.
Has it done that since it was announced?
Well, the move hasn't happened yet.
But it's been announced, and I don't think the move is going to make any difference. And Trump says he's going to do it by the end of the year. So I think, if you don't support it now, it's going to be a non-issue anyway. So why not support it?
Well, the truth of the matter is on the ground. Jerusalem has a Jewish quarter, Christian quarter, Muslim quarter, and an Armenian quarter. So the city on the ground is a shared city. That's the story on the ground. Where we move the embassy, truthfully, is inconsequential in changing that situation. But we have to make sure the security of Israel is firm.
Again, we're not talking about security, we're just talking about location of an embassy.
Right now, because many Russian immigrants live in Brighton Beach, it's not a part of Russian Federation. It's still America. So if we have Armenian quarter in Jerusalem, it's not Armenia, it's still Israel.
I'm not saying Israel doesn't administer.
But
Israel
you say it's a It's not shared.
Israel administers the city, but it is a shared city on the ground. There's 4 quarters, and they're mostly divided along religious and racial lines.
Well, I would say I would disagree. I was in Jerusalem many times.
Yeah,
You're saying that also we have like Little Italy and we have a Chinatown in New York City, for example.
And those are administered by New York.
Correct, but like this is still. Okay.
Thank you all.
I wanted to give a chance to say a few words. Our judges, we have several very esteemed judges here. And Ross, I know you're a patient person, you will say a few words by the way. So I wanted to give a chance to say a few words to Stephen Mostofsky. He is a resident of 45th Assembly District actually. He is a very good judge. He is acting Supreme Court judge. And he will say a few words, please, Steve.
So, I've lived in Brooklyn my entire life. My parents lived in Brooklyn. I was very surprised that all 5 of my children actually stayed in South Brooklyn. They all live within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of walking from my home. And my 9 grandchildren all live in Southern Brooklyn. So I've been involved in this community. I was on Community Board 21 School Board, member of the Board of the Midwood Development Corporation, and I was able to distribute and raise over $100,000 in scholarship money that I gave out to students here in the neighborhood. And 5 years ago I decided to run for judge, and I got elected to the civil court. During my years in practice, most of my practice was involved with family law. And I dealt with different kinds of family situations, from child abuse, child neglect, to divorces, custody, visitation, child support. And I learned a lot about the families in Brooklyn mostly. Most of my practice was here in Brooklyn, and the different challenges that they face. Schools, monetarily, housing, because these things came up during all of the cases. I did many cases that I did as assigned counsel for indigent people as well. One of my most interesting stories is I was walking with my wife in Kings Plaza, and all of a sudden somebody's yelling, "Mr. Mostofsky, Mr. Mostofsky." And it doesn't usually happen in Kings Plaza. And one of my clients who I had in a child neglect case was now, had her children back, and she was working in a store in Kings Plaza, and she saw me walking down the hall, and she wanted to let me know that she was successful and she was gainfully employed, and I was very surprised that of all the people she actually recognized me a few years later. Now, since I've been a judge, I've sat in the family court, the civil court, and now I'm an acting Supreme Court judge in Brooklyn. And even in this current situation, I spent a year in the family court. Now, if you live in Brooklyn long enough, you sort of learn a little bit about Brooklyn, and you learn a little bit about pragmatics. I was probably in family court for about 3 or 4 days, and ACS wanted to take the children from some people because they didn't have enough beds. So I said, "How long is it going to take you to get the beds?" And they said, 3 days. And I said, "Did you ever hear of sleepies?" Now, ACS looked at me like I was insane. I said, "If you listen to the commercial, you call up, you get a bed, it's there within 12 to 24 hours, and you have enough beds for the people." I said, "I want you to come back tomorrow with a receipt for the beds." And I looked at this pragmatically. In many of the cases, the ACS caseworkers would say, "Send the children home." The lawyers didn't want the children to go home. But the fact is that my job as a judge was to do what's best for the family and what's best for the children. And now, where I am, I'm doing the mental hygiene cases here in Brooklyn. And most people know that there is a problem with the homeless people. And my wife has told me that in the last year and a half I've become very liberal because my idea about homeless people has changed tremendously now that I see that the problem has a lot to do with mental illness. People come into my courtroom with all types of problems, all types of mental illness. I had somebody in my courtroom today who's 29 years old. Her mother lost her parental rights when this girl was 12, and all of her siblings, the mother lost the parental rights. So this child has basically no connection legally to her mother. Her mother is homeless and sort of hangs out in the neighborhood where she lives. Her sister couldn't handle it and moved to New Jersey. She came to court today to get an order and a warrant so they should pick up her mother so they could take her to the hospital for help. She goes out in the street and tries to help her mother. She had her mother in her house until the mother just picked up and walked out on a freezing cold day into the street when it was 12 and 19 degrees a few weeks ago with no coat and no clothing. And here's a girl whose mother basically abandoned her when she's 12 years old, and she comes into my courtroom and she was crying today, crying tears that she wanted to help her mother. And you realize that your job is a lot more important as a judge to look at the population here in Brooklyn and to see what you can do as a judge to deal fairly at the same time that you understand where the people are coming from. Even in school claims court, when I had people after the hurricane or the storm, and people would come in with different problems, and sometimes you can help them and sometimes you couldn't. When I ran for judge, so of course, when you're a judge, you can't really do anything for somebody. So I had some wise guy at one of the train stations yell at me and says, "What are you going to do for me?" So I sat for a second, I said, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be fair." He gave me a look like that. And the next few times somebody yelled that at me, that's what I yelled back at them. I'm going to be fair, and that's what I tried to do in 5 years on the bench. So I'm an acting Supreme Court judge. I'm trying to move up to a full Supreme Court judge. I'm in Ari's district over here. I don't live too far away, and hopefully it'll happen soon.
Thank you.
I have a question.
See if I can answer it.
Okay.
But by the way, I'm waiting for Chaim to find a house I can move into if I sell my house to the assessed value that they say that I have. Because I don't think I can find a house that costs less than the one that I have.
I wouldn't move in your neighborhood.
Thanks a lot. You don't live too far away.
As a realtor judge, I can tell you there are two values, the assessed value and the market value.
Yeah, but the assessed value I think isn't too far away from the market value anymore.
Well, I don't know. I'd have to see. Anyway, I have a lot of problems with surrogates and landlord-tenant courts. Are they ever going to do anything about either one of those two courts? Are they ever going to try to work something out with them, revamp them in any way possible?
Well, there's a very big study that was going on, and they're supposed to be coming out and making some changes in landlord-tenant court, that the tenants are supposed to get represented. And I think that's going to do a lot to help. And I think some people may look at that as a negative, that now the tenants are going to have attorneys and it's going to make things much harder. But one of the hardest things to deal with are pro se litigants that don't really know the law and don't know what's happening. Because the judge has to deal with somebody who doesn't really know the law. On the other side, there's a lawyer and a landlord that say who does know the law and is going for their rights. So in a lot of ways, if the tenants do have attorneys on their own, it makes it a lot easier to deal lawyer to lawyer and try to work out the problems. And that just came out in, I think, the Law Journal this week or last week, that they're looking to do this to help straighten out and make some changes into the...
It's only going to expand the process.
Well,
it's only going to make each case longer and longer.
As I told you, I'm a judge and not a legislator. I'm just telling you that that's what they're trying to do.
I know.
Surrogates court is based on the laws that apply to the estate procedure and I forgot what the EPTL. And those are the laws that get applied to surrogates court. And surrogates court is another one of those places that if you go by yourself and you try to represent yourself, you'll never get out of there alive.
I did.
And if you have an attorney,
I did, and I did.
Good, you're lucky. The only good thing I could say is they have some of the best clerks in the world, and if you do go in, they're very, very helpful. Because I actually did a surrogates case for someone, a friend of mine who didn't have any money, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and they were very, very helpful to me. There were 12 grandchildren that had to divide the money, and they helped me figure out...
It takes a year to probate a will.
Well, this wasn't a will, this was not a will.
Takes
right.
a year to
Well,
probate a will.
You also have to understand that there are not enough... There's a shortage of clerks, there's a shortage of court officers, there's a shortage of staff, there are no secretaries for the judges. So all of us, I think if you ask any of the other judges, we are working under very tough conditions. And this applies, the more difficult the cases become, such as in surrogates court and other places, the more that it affects the people that are coming before the court.
I believe it's also an issue for a state, because
Right.
this issue was raised several times, that they have to invest more money in our judicial system across the board.
In my building, my court officer told me that they're losing 3 court officers every single month to retirement.
Whoa.
From the last class in the academy, they were given 3 court officers. Now, if you think that we're losing 3 a month to retirement, and we have 3 period for the next year, well, there's going to be a big shortage of court officers. So again, this is something that judges can't control. We deal with the facts, we try to do the best we can. But that's what we try to do. We try to do our jobs as best as possible. And listen, I live in this community. I look at some of the people that come before me, and I look at the addresses, and they're 2 blocks away from me, around the corner from me, a block where I grew up. These are the people that are Brooklyn. And I think all of the judges that are here, we try to do the best that we can. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I know we're running late. We started a little bit late, but like we have a lot of interesting guest speakers. I have to give a chance to each one of them. Theresa Ciccotto, civil court judge, very good friend of this club, was many times. Please say a few words.
Sir, we are not working under ideal circumstances, but we are working. That's what we were elected to do, and I assure you that's what we're doing. I'm Theresa Ciccotto. I'm sorry I came a little late. I was at a Brooklyn Women's Bar event. It was a judiciary night, and I had to be there because I'm a former president of the organization, and I'm still on the board of directors. But any opportunity to come to Aries Club is truly a privilege, and it's a pleasure, because it's very homey here. We get to see great speakers. Councilman, you're doing a phenomenal job, and I wish I lived in your district.
Well, I want to know which bar you went to tonight?
And it's warm here, huh?
It's warm, it's very nice. Just a quick background. I have been on the bench only 5 years. I've just been, since I last came here, I've been promoted. I'm now an acting Supreme Court Justice, and I'm sitting in matrimonial. Let me tell you a very quick background. Yes, born and raised in Brooklyn. I think I need a passport to go out of Brooklyn. No doubt I will die in Brooklyn. I was, for many years, an assistant district attorney. I was also a criminal defense attorney, and I was a court attorney. And it took me 11 years to get on the bench. It was not an easy venture. It was probably one of the most heartbreaking travels and journeys I've ever had to do. But let me tell you something. With struggle, there comes certain things. Not only does there come success, with struggle there comes faith. And with struggle there comes humanity and humility. And it gives you a sense of suffering of others. It made me better. So I was elected to the civil court. I stayed there for a few years. And then I was asked to go to matrimonial court because of my demeanor. It takes a certain type of person to deal with people that are involved in a divorce. Families are fractured.
To calm them down.
Well, you know, there's a certain type of, you need a certain type of demeanor, you need a certain type of way to deal with people. So I was put immediately into Supreme Court, and I was dealing with primarily some med-mal cases, some personal injury cases, and I finally started matrimonial in January. And when you're dealing with matrimonial cases, you're dealing with families that are fractured, they're torn apart. I'm dealing with child custody, child visitation, I'm dealing with some abuse cases. And my job at this point, what I love about matrimonial is because it gives you an opportunity to do a little more than you normally would be able to in any other aspect of the law. So I can actually put more of myself into it, and I have to tell you, it's an important thing to do, because at the very least, what you need to do is to remind people that this is, yes, it's probably one of the hardest things they've ever had to do, if not the hardest thing they've done, that you're dealing with children who want their families together, who are being tossed about, who are being used as pawns. And what if I could just do one thing to try to facilitate the process and try to make the process as fair and as palatable and as bearable, to just stop what I like to say to them, to stop the agony and to stop the crazy, then it's worth every day that I'm doing this. Now, I'd just like to tell you very, very, very briefly a little bit about my philosophy, all right? My job as a judge, this is not a right, this is a privilege. When you elected me, when you elected everybody else, you did so, I hope through places like this club, that you did so with knowledge about that person. But you elected us to do a job, and that is simply this, to promote and protect your rights, all right? We are there to do that. We are there not only to do justice, of course, that's the pat answer. We're here to do justice. But we are here to make sure that no matter how a case goes, people leave knowing that everything was done for them regardless of whether they were successful in their claim or not. This is not an easy job, because and I will tell you something else. If you're not losing sleep at night, then you're not doing your job, because you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with their liberty, you're dealing with their money, you're dealing with their family, you're dealing with their sanity. And if you don't take that seriously, then you should go home. And you should not have this job. And I say that all the time. You know, people come in, oh, I want to be Supreme Court Justice, I've done this, I've done... You know what? It's what you've done. We all want something. It's quite a difference when you earn something. Earn something. That's the most important thing. I'm running for Supreme Court, full Supreme Court. Thank you very much for giving me your time. God bless you and keep you, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few more judges, I promise. Will be short presentations, but we have to give respect to everybody who's coming to our club, so they will come again, and they will know that it's important to come to our club, speak to you, so...
Can I now have a donut?
You can have, yes. Donut, tangerines, etc. No problem. So I saw Michael Gerstein, please, Michael Gerstein, civil court judge, also very good friend of this club. Also acting Supreme Court Justice, also good demeanor, very positive, you know, when you talk to Michael, you also have a good feelings, you know, you feel optimistic all day. So, Michael Gerstein.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I will try to take the hint and be shorter than I would like to be. Lawyers like to talk. I am Michael Gerstein. I'm on the bench since 2006. I was elected in 2005. I don't know if our Councilman Chaim Deutsch remembers this, but before he was a councilman, he was the head of the showroom, and he wrote a very nice letter supporting me. I was re-elected 2 years ago in 2015. I spent over a decade, even though I was elected to civil court, I spent over a decade in criminal court, but I'm now in my second year doing civil cases. I have a deep connection to this district. I never actually lived in the district, but when I grew up, I lived about 5 blocks east of the district, between Avenue V and Avenue W, across from the Sheep's Head Nostrum projects. I lived for 40 years or so, just now in Flatbush, just north of the district. Just on the other side, if you know the Long Island Railroad cut. I went to Sheep's Head Bay High School, Brooklyn College, because, as my mother and father said at the time, it was free, and by the way, you're living home. I went to NYU Law School. I practiced law with firms and as a solo practitioner for 30-odd years before I went on the bench. What I did in criminal court, I did 2 things. I sent a lot of people to jail, but I'm much more proud of all of the people I kept out of jail. Until a year or so ago, you could be deemed a criminal at 16 years of age. You could end up with a criminal record for jumping the turnstile, for shoplifting a blouse out of Macy's. And at the time, we had a district attorney and some young assistant district attorneys who thought they would make their bones by not putting some of these young kids in jail, at least giving them a criminal record which would mark them for life. And on the bench, I'm very proud of all of the cases where, for non-violent matters, I convinced the district attorneys that these kids should be given a second chance. Now, I want to recognize, before I forget, my colleagues Judge Mostofsky, Judge Ciccotto, and Judge Wan in the back. I have the utmost admiration for all of them. I can tell you, as a personal matter, I would be very happy not to be in the matrimonial part and not to deal with the broken families that I saw so much of in the criminal court, where you see these kids, one parent, the parent is working all day and half of the night trying to make enough money for the rent and the milk, and there's a 16 or 17-year-old kid out in the street, and what a surprise that he or she is in criminal court. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit of the politics of this.